Freelancers, small business owners, consultants, and solopreneurs. Some people are just drawn to working for themselves. I'm Owen Roth. In this show, I have conversations with self-employed folks about their career journeys. Welcome to the Bossless Path podcast.
And here we go. Today I'm joined by Jeremy Groom, owner of Groom Analytics. Jeremy, thanks for being here.
You bet.
So tell us a little bit about what you do.
I'm an applied statistical consultant. And what that means is I analyze data and I try to find answers from those data and give those to my clients. So it's a lot of exploring and trying to find if patterns exist. And I find it to be pretty exciting.
I know a little bit about data analytics, but could you explain some more a little bit deeper about what that means and looks like day to day?
Sure. It could be, well, first of all, a lot of my projects have to do in the natural resource realm. So there might be a government agency and some folks there have gathered some data on especially natural resources. Maybe it's fish, maybe it's stream temperature or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can come in and help them analyze those data. So the deal is I could step in at before any data are collected and help them with study designs, what to watch out for while they're collecting the data. And then finally, it could even be some database information. How should they store those data? And then finally, the analysis and write-up and interpretation.
Gotcha. You said that's your primary focus. Is that, do you have other clients outside of the natural resources?
Just a little bit. For instance, I've helped my wife's K through 12 school. Okay. It's an online school, and I've done some work for them. Helps a friend of mine at the University of Oregon. She's involved in a program there. And so they were working on an NSF grant, and they needed a section to sound statistical.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So most of the clients you're working with, would they understand what you're presenting to them, or is that part of your job where you have to not only mold the data, but also figure out a way to make it accessible to those who might not?
That's a really good question. That's actually very central. I have to be able to explain it. Yeah. And translate and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's the situation, and here's what we found, and here's what we can say about it. Here's what we can't say about it, and try to put some useful sidebars on it, but also make it so they can turn around and tell somebody else what it is. Is
there a visual element to that, like slideshow, graphs, what have you?
So I'm pretty good at the data analysis. I fall back on just doodling in PowerPoint slides, and saying, and I'm huge on imagery, and so I try to break it down that way for people and talk it through with them. And if they don't get something, then I'm like, okay, I missed that part. Hang on, let me try again.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've dabbled in trying to understand data analytics for my own. I was actually looking at that as potential career, not super long ago, but one thing I do remember is there seems to be a level of creativity in how you would interpret data. Am I remembering that correctly or maybe incorrectly?
Actually, can you explain it a little more?
Sure. I don't really have a working example, but from, again, vague memory.
Yeah.
Years old, from just some articles I read. It sounded like doing data analytics, if you have a big pool of data, you have to figure out how to get an answer out of it. So it's, from my understanding, there's a level of creativity that you had to have because there's not necessarily a clear first step into what to do. Is that correct, or is there usually a...
Actually, I do have one.
You do? Okay.
It's going to be a total mess, I found, unless we start with, what is the question? What do we want to find?
Okay.
Because when we have huge amounts of data, it's so easy to get sidetracked and lost and just confused. And so with all of my clients, I start, okay, what's the question?
Yeah.
What is it you really want to know? And then we can start looking at, can we answer the question this way? Will this actually get us there? And there is some back and forth. And I think there is a lot of creativity. What analysis approach do we use? What portions of the data? How are we interpreting it? I think there's an artistic end to it.
Yeah. What does it look like throughout a project? Is there a lot of back and forth with the client, or once you have that first question answered of what? What are we doing? Is it then it's just like you're like, I'll take it from here, and then you kind of work on your own until delivery?
Back and forth. So I need to be working with the client, in large part because they're often the subject expert. I can mess around with the numbers, but they know what's going on with those numbers, where they came from, what goes into them, what the systems are.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm helping a hydrologist. I'm not a hydrologist. And so I think that's actually something that people can make a bit of a mistake if they're in my field, of assuming they know a lot, or they know as much as, or that they understand the field they're helping. And I think it really taking a step back and asking questions about it. Like, does this answer make sense to you? But in the meantime, so I run some initial analyses, look at some numbers, and come back to them and say, hey, so here's the approach I'm taking, and here's how I think we're going to get from A to B, and what do you think? And what am I missing? And they can fill me in. And even if I take those steps, I'm probably going to have a bunch of preconceived notions on my end.
Sure.
And they are on theirs. And we have to come to a meeting in the middle.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
You've figured out the problem, and then you've had a back and forth, and then at that point, I mean, I guess the back and forth continues, right, until the end.
Oh yeah.
And then once you present your findings, is there typically more like conversation that happens? They're like, oh, now that we know this, can you answer this additional question? Or do you often find that it's just like once you've presented the question to their initial answer, then that's like the end of the project?
It absolutely depends. So I finished a project with, it was with Department of Forestry, but also working with the federal U.S. Forest Service. And by the end of it, we have a really nice database. And as far as I'm concerned, we've just answered one question with it. So we're totally poised to answer more. And the people I'm working with are excited to move forward with that.
Yeah.
So these things can really kind of snowball. And other times that can be it. There's also so there's the excitement of discovering things in data analysis. What I love is finding new things that we weren't anticipating, but in retrospect, oh, this makes sense, or changes our understanding of things.
Okay.
But there can also be the risk of, if you want to call it that, of we have questions and we go into the data, and our findings are non-conclusive. And I can only throttle the numbers so much, but we could be there, and so there can be some reevaluating midstream as well.
Okay. Is that ever the case where you'll get, well, maybe it wouldn't be the end, but like what would normally be the end, you're just like, statistically, we can't say anything. And then they're just like, okay, well, we'll come back to you, or thank you for your time.
It usually morphs into something else of, these are good scientists. And so they might say, you know what, we've looked at this in a pretty novel way. Let's move forward and say that we didn't find anything. That's a good scientist thing to do.
Yeah.
But hey, check out these nifty new things we tried. Yeah. So usually there's some level of learning that went on that's useful to both of us.
Sure. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So let's go back and walk us through how you got to where you are now as far as your career.
I started off, I have a doctorate in ecology from Ohio State University, which I forever get confused with Oregon State University.
Yeah, OSU.
Exactly. I landed a job at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Carlsbad, California office, and that's where Legoland is, very, very close, and so just north of San Diego.
Yeah.
And I worked as a wildlife biologist there, and my job, there were these different large plans in place for, they're called habitat conservation plans, but they allow wiggle room for developers or somebody to do this to the land while making sure they're protecting some other aspect of the land for listed species that are there. And my job was to make sure that the science they were going to use, the monitoring, was going to be sufficient to provide the information that was needed. So you sort of see a glimmer of where this is going, because we have to ask the right question and have things set up correctly. And so this kept me involved in study design and looking at assumptions and making sure different parts of studies, as it were lining up. And I was in this process, supposedly, giving forth advice and suggestions and I guess demands about how things should change. But I also needed to have the credentials in order to do that. And so my group of fellow biologists would develop our own smaller studies of threatened and endangered species and carry them out and gather the data and analyze them and say, hey, here's what we found. Here's we've been saying these particular methods are good to use, and here's why.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they can be done. So I was doing that, and it led me to some fascinating places. I was designing one study for looking at a robber fly, the Delhi flower-loving sandfly, I think. I did a little bit of data analysis on some data collected there.
Okay.
And this is in portions of the LA basin where these are remnant sand dunes, really cool systems. And there's rather pretty flies that live there that happen to be listed.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't make things very popular with the locals because it's a fly.
Yeah. Okay.
People want to make money off developing the land, and this is holding them up. But I was only really a very small involvement in that project. A much more involved project was I set up a study to look at the effects of off-road vehicles on a threatened plant species, Pearson's milkvetch, out in the Algodones sand dunes, which are, if you travel just directly east from San Diego, go over some mountains, you'll come to some sand dunes, and they're huge. They're like 40 miles long.
Yeah.
It was a bizarre time in my life. I was throwing together this study very, very quickly, and getting some quads from this refuge lined up with talking to the Bureau of Land Management folks who have their own facilities there. Hey, can we store the quads? They're totally geared up. We need GPS units, get those lined up, start training people. So I'd never ridden a quad in my life. Suddenly I'm like leading, all right, let's go get trained. So all these other fellow office employees, and we're heading out to learn how to drive quads. And it was pretty wild. And then we're out there gathering these data, and it's a politically contentious issue. There's a lot of interest in people riding on the dunes, and the BLM had closed some of them to help protect this plant. And we're out there getting data to see how things fall. And I did end up defending the work we'd done to a Bush appointee who was reviewing a lot of work that the Department of Interior was doing, and it was antagonistic. So things were heated. There were a lot of interested parties involved. So that was California. And I guess the point I want to get across there was it was really tremendous conflict of natural resources.
It's kind of the common case with BLM land, from my understanding.
Oh, boy. Yeah, you talk about the Malheur or wildlife refuge that got invaded or other places. So, yeah, they've got a lot of contention.
Yeah.
But then even the folks who dealt with stuff that was closer to San Diego, the land values there were so astronomical that the political pressure to develop and not preserve endangered species was tremendous.
Right.
It was made for a kind of an intense work environment.
Yeah, I bet.
So then this job comes up with the Oregon Department of Forestry to do monitoring. And I said, hey, I do monitoring. And my wife and I were really excited about living in Corvallis. And so the job was in Salem, but that's commutable. So we moved up here for that. And I remember showing up to the Department of Forestry, and I realized I had a little bit of a PTSD from my work in Southern California. Like, I was trying to find out, what are the office politics? Sure. What are the factions? Yeah. What do I need to know?
Get your finger on the heartbeat, kind of feel the atmosphere out. Yeah.
And instead it was this, no, we work together, and here's the chain of command. It's about 4 deep, and we all have lunch together. And it was just, I didn't know what to make of it. So it was a much more supportive place to work.
That's good.
I mean, there were wonderful people in Fish and Wildlife, but it's a tough place.
Tough place in a different way.
In a very different way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stresses. There is conflict. People are getting cold called by lawyers and so on, trying to. The lawyers might be trying to look for an answer that they want, and so it's just a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
But with the Department of Forestry, I stepped into a large monitoring project that was looking at stream temperatures. Specifically, our project had been set up, and it was a great project. I thought they did a really super job. Can we see if the current forest practice rules are protecting stream temperature? And so they'd followed some 30 plus sites, and some data taken before harvest. And then they had the plans. They knew where the trees would get cut, and they looked at them after harvest. And the sites were harvested according to the plans. And then they're gathering data, immediately after harvest, and then for the years following harvest for about 5 years.
Okay.
So totally intensive.
Yeah.
And I'm coming into the tail end of that, and I start. It was great. I got out on the ground, went with the crews, gathered the data.
The data is taking temperatures?
They would put these little robot loggers, they look like large chapstick containers.
Okay.
And you attach them to a rock in the stream or something, and they just sit there and record the temperature.
Okay. So you're going out there and the crew and collecting them. They stay in there for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, all season.
All season, okay.
Or we'd go to these different streams and be tallying the amount of trees there. We did a little bit of our own measurement of how wide the buffers were, and data along those lines, like what's happening in the stream channel? How deep is it? How wide is it?
Right.
So we could see a big stream might react differently than a small stream, and we wanted to control for that.
Okay, all the metrics.
Yeah.
And you said this was the tail end of this 5-year study that you came in on.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
So I started analyzing the data, and I thought we did some cool analyses, but the analyses did show that there were some problems on the private lands. They were warming more than the regulations allowed. It was written into law, into statute that, okay, if this happens, then the department will have examine its rules and possibly come up with new rules. And this was really unpopular, particularly with the timber industry, landowners, because if you increase the number of trees around the streams, then that's less timber that can get harvested.
Right.
That's their bottom line. That became a really intense period of communicating science, like talking with landowners and representatives about, yes, here's what we did, here's what we found, and here's how we're interpreting it. And it was extremely intense. I did have the full backing of, I felt, the Department of Forestry. So that's a place where you're within a food chain as large as the federal government. That can fall through. Some person higher up on the chain might have their own, who knows, agenda or something, or direction of how they want the program to go. And you might find a lack of support. So I had full support here, which was I was a little surprised by that. But what it meant was we were going to march down this line of hey, let's go see what changing the law looks like.
Yeah.
And it was hard on everybody, absolutely everybody. And I asked myself, what do I like most about showing up to work? And I could answer that. I like helping people, and I like data analysis.
Okay.
And then I asked myself, how can I do more of that? And I talked with my wife, and I'd had a dream about working for myself at some point in the future. And it just looked like, you know what? I've been here a while. I've got connections. There's a lot of good things going on. But what if I stepped out and became a consultant instead? So I left Oregon Department of Forestry and got a master's degree at Oregon State University in statistics.
You've mentioned that you did a little bit of data analysis, both in that forestry and when you're in California. Was that something that you had a little bit of training on how to do prior to leaving and that second degree?
That's a great question. Actually, I would say I'd done at least a moderate amount of data analysis at that point.
Okay, I'm underselling you. Moderate.
What happened was in my graduate program at Ohio State University, we were going through all the steps of here we're designing our own projects for our dissertations, and then gathering the data and analyzing it, and do that several times for the chapters. And I was learning a number of skills there that then directly transferred to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, where now I was using those same skills plus in this wildlife setting of we really need to estimate population sizes or things like that. And so I think I got more focused and rigorous. Then when I was in forestry, I'm suddenly looking at stream temperature and lots of data. We have 1 million stream temperature data points. What am I going to do with those?
Yeah.
This is where a lot of creativity, I think, came into it was, well, what am I going to do with those? And so combing the literature and how other people have done the statistics. And all of these stages, I found myself going into different statistics, including I was doing predictive statistics. I got into an area called Bayesian statistics, which is you're not using a canned model. You're kind of creating your own, which is both complex and utterly liberating. And so I was getting all these experiences going, whoa, this is cool. This is great. Yeah.
You had a taste over those many years of, working for these government agencies.
Yeah.
But then you're like, okay, I want to work as a consultant. So still, you had the idea of still being a consultant and you're working in the same, essentially, I guess, industry for lack of my
works
better term. Yeah. Okay. So what did that look like is you going back to school, getting the degree in statistics, you said, and then what happened from there?
Yeah, I went back to school and got the degree and learned that, so I was 40 at the time, and I learned that young people are really, really smart. It was humbling, and the program was fantastic. I felt like it gave me a lot of the good underpinnings of a lot of things I'd been working on, but now I had a greater understanding of it. So that was great. But right after graduation, I decided to hang out a shingle. And so I did go to a small business development center class over at the local community college and did some things in advance to help me figure out how to emotionally lower the bar of starting my own business. Like, here's the things I got to watch out for and the things I need.
That's smart. Yeah.
It was the SBDCs are an incredible resource. Have you worked with one at all?
I dabbled like years and years and years ago, but no, essentially no.
Okay.
Yeah, I should. You're not the first person to have mentioned this to me. Yeah.
They've got great resources. So the class was really good. They had a bunch of entrepreneurs come in and establish that talk to the class of people who wanted to start. Oh my gosh, like horse therapy to, I guess, a bit of manufacturing, crafts, data analysis. So a wide variety, really cool people with their dreams about what they want to do.
Yeah.
But the SBDCs are often, nobody hears about them because they can't advertise. Because I guess they got sued about, this might be a total story on my part, but I heard that they may have gotten sued about advertising their services because then they could be stepping on the toes of those who are doing it for business.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
At any rate, I recommend people look them up.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it benefited you greatly.
One of the best thing was I tried to write a website or develop a website on my own and say what I was doing. And they offered a service where I just called them up and said, hey, I'd love to have my website reviewed. And I see that you offer that service. And this fellow did. And he let me know, I have no idea what you do for a business. And
that says a lot right there.
It totally does. And so it helped me like, wait, what? And totally refocus on how I develop my website to be as crystal clear as it could be.
Yeah.
But also take some time to go look at websites that people were doing that did similar work as mine and ask, which ones do I like and which ones don't I like? I felt like I gained so much from that experience.
Yeah. That's a great way to like really shape what you're doing is model it, not necessarily steal, but, model it off of what other people are doing as far as a website or probably other things too, I'm assuming.
I would think.
I mean, I do that all the time, looking at how other videographers and photographers handle their business and, the project from the projects, the final videos, photos they create to the way that they interact, or at least the ways I can see that they interact on the web,
right.
And all that, the communication, all that.
Well, that's cool.
And I think that's just what you do in any form of business and self-employment is you model off of other people.
Yes.
That's what we are as human, right? We're social. We kind of like go with the pack, with what works and what doesn't.
And reinventing the wheel gets old after a while.
It does, yeah.
That's the thing about working for ourselves, I think, is that we're taking on quite a little more than just the thing that we're interested in. We have to do all the workings of the business. And
Oh, yeah.
anytime we can find ways to do it well and not have it become something else that we spend a huge amount of our time on, it's a total win.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, having other people or organizations like you're explaining now to help guide you in that is huge. Was there anything, any other things you can think of off the top of your head other than the website that you were just like, that were revelations to you? Were like, oh, I need to actually think more about this or have an intention about this.
I have a feeling there were things in the class, finances, insurance, probably items along those lines that I needed to think about and figure out that they clued me into.
Is there, actually, without going too deep into this, because I think it could probably be pretty boring, but I am curious as far as like the insurance stuff. Is that a factor when you're doing analysis? If you need like maybe an errors and omissions type insurance to like not have any get sued over like providing a conclusion that later gets disproven or something like that? Is that a thing?
Yes.
Okay.
And to me, it seems a little ridiculous. But like nothing's come up around that.
Sure.
So far. Fingers crossed. However, what I did find was I took the time and spent the money to become insured. And then these contracts would come up with, say, the state of Oregon or Washington or something.
Yeah.
And as part of the contracting procedure, there it is on the line, you need to have X amount of insurance.
Yeah.
So, I could have a philosophical conversation with myself as to whether or not I needed it.
Sure, yeah.
Boy, it made things easier
it's a literal requirement on certain contracts.
Totally.
I've seen that myself where like there's one off the top of my head, I can think of one video project that involved like drone work, and just like that was like I already had like insurance for that like liability that included my drone, not just on the ground video stuff. And that just was in my mind just best business practice. It had never been required before, but then this client who hired me is just like, oh, I'm glad you had that because that's a requirement for this job. And he's like, you'd be surprised how many other videographers don't have that. And when him says that, then he's like, then I just can't hire them, or I have to tell them to go get it, and then they have to go get it. And he's like, so it's great that you already have that. So
speed things up for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, and I can see that because drones, that's a tricky area.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty new to it at this point. It's like most things, where it's just like you think it's simple, and it is in a lot of ways. Like we're talking about, you just like fly, and like I haven't crashed ever, but but like you do have to think about those. Like, oh, there's the crashing, and there's liability from like the physical damage that it could cause, and then there's also the invasive nature of like having a camera in the sky and like all the issues that could arise from that, and people being having some type of litigation potentially that you're spying on them or something like that. So, yeah, just like anything, it gets messier once you actually involve it in the business and you're not doing it just as a hobby anymore.
Absolutely.
Not that you necessarily do statistics as a hobby. Maybe you do. I don't know. But yeah, for that one. But when in your journey did you think that you were going to go out on your own? It sounded like once you moved to Oregon, you had that experience. That's when you mentioned it just now when you tell me. But was there a time before that you're like always thinking that might be something you do?
I left out some details, which is 2009 was a bad year. And so big recession. And my division was half funded by taxes from timber harvest. So it became, an office of tumbleweeds. We all got the axe. And I landed at Oregon State University, working in forest engineering research and management section, and I guess college. Anyway, I did work there under Temesgen Hailemariam, a professor there, and that was great. And I was able to continue doing the analyses. I did another analysis for him, and then I had the opportunity to get rehired by the Oregon Department of Forestry. But during that time period, I also began thinking about, I saw people going through and getting masters in statistics as well as part of their PhD program in forestry. And I think it really was influential for me thinking about not just working for myself, but a pathway forward. So if I wanted to become statistical consultant, I definitely wanted to have myself have some more credentials.
Gotcha. What was the next step? Did you, through the work that you had been doing prior, did you already have the connections where you could did you reach out and do a lot of cold calling to get clients? What did the early days of business look like for you as a consultant?
Great question. One thing I did was I made a list of my contacts and what sort of work they did.
Mm-hmm.
And my strategy was to contact a few of them at a time and say, hey, I'm reaching out. I'm starting my own business. And if you hear of projects you think I might be able to be helpful on, please let me know. And I also contacted people who I knew probably had work that they wanted done, but hadn't gotten around to doing it.
Okay.
And also where I came when I came from the statistics department, they would get calls from people saying, hey, we've got some questions and are wondering if we can get some help. And so they would direct some of that my way.
At the university, the statistics department.
Mm-hmm.
So they're allowed to like kind of say, all right, here's some list of former students or people we
in
know.
the area.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of warm leads on that front.
Exactly.
So you found success though, between the combo of that, those warm leads and the reaching out, the cold calls.
Yes.
Is there a certain amount of clients you take on at one time? Is it like, I guess I know so little about your line of work.
Right.
Is it like you'll have just one big project and that's what you're working on for that month or months, or do you have like a lot of pots?
I guess I love having a number of pots. Like
okay.
3, 4, maybe 5 projects.
Mm-hmm.
They also have different levels of immediacy. Some are, we have to get this out right now.
Yeah.
And that'll probably rise to the top. And I might do a full month of just working on somebody's work that way.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to work on, say, a 50-50 between two projects, or get some diversity in there. So sometimes I'll be doing a review of some work others people have done, which requires less time, but it's awfully nice to work in amongst other work. Yeah. So one of the greatest things I like about working for myself is the diversity. I just get all these different projects and at all different stages of where they are in their own timeline of completion and looking at answering all these different questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I see a lot of parallels between what you do and what I do sometimes.
Really?
Well, in that work style where it's like, I could have like photos for this client going on
mm-hmm.
and like the due date as far as the final deliverables might be like 2 weeks out from when I actually took the photos.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm working on another video a separate video for a different client that is in pre-production and we're doing the planning and all that. And then there might be one that was already in production and now it's in the post-production. So I'm doing editing and all the revisions and stuff. So mm-hmm. it's like that's where the parallel is. There's a lot of pots with different stages and that I find enjoyment out of that. But then every now and then you might only have one thing on your plate. And
exactly.
That's all you're doing. Yeah. How do you balance out your work week if there is a work week for you? Is there a standard work week where you're just like, do you go to office hours? I know some contractors and consultants will just be like, okay, I'm only working from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Those are my imposed office hours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can impose on myself really well.
Okay.
But I have flexible hours too. So maybe it is 9 to 5:30. Maybe it's starting at 7:30, going to 5:30 with I go exercising in the middle of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I have found, and I think I'm getting more this way. I'm almost becoming snarly around other things that might impose, like, you're working from home. Why don't you do this while you're here? Why don't you blah, blah, blah? And this is not my wife's. I'm not like, my wife never does this to me. But other folk, like neighbors around who know that I'm nearby, might ask, hey, can you help me out with this or that or something? And I become much more defensive about my time.
Sure.
Because, it's an opportunity cost, but even more so, I think for myself, it's a piece of kind of like integrity. This is my job.
Sure.
And I'd really want to respect myself by defending the hours around it.
Yeah.
Do you find it, or how do you feel about your setting your hours?
Sure. It's an ongoing process. I think so I've only been doing the full-time self-employment for, it's been less than 2 years.
Okay.
And I find what happened was the early days, I viewed it as like, I've got ultimate freedom. The only times I absolutely have locked in times are when I'm doing shoots, photography or video. And like, those are the times when I have to be at X location at a certain hour. Everything outside of that is like pretty flexible in when it like needs to, whether it's post-production or the pre-production of like planning or editing. Those can fit in around my life. And I don't have kids. So like I've got much more flexibility of how I can mold that into my life. So I'm like, oh, this is great. I'll just like have the ultimate flexible life.
Right.
Which was one of the many draws to it. Right. But I can relate a lot to what you're saying about getting like a little protective, which is what's happened for myself over time. Because those early days, I didn't respect my own work as much, I would say, because I was just like prioritizing the freedom. And then like when I could flex to when whether it's someone wants to go do something for fun, they're like, oh, you should come out tonight and like, do whatever. We're all group of friends is going to do something. And I'm just like, yeah, sure, I can do that. Knowing in the back of my mind, like, but I really need to get this batch of photos done for this due date that's coming up.
Right.
So I wouldn't really respect it. And kind of like what you're saying is like, I would let other people come in and kind of dictate because of their understanding of my flexibility.
That's a really good way to say it.
Yeah. And then it didn't take very long, but after a little period of time, I realized I'm like, oh, I need to take this more seriously. Not only defending it externally to people who are coming in and trying to, not capitalize is the wrong word, but like, impose on my flexibility because they don't know. All they view it from the outside is just like, oh, Owen's got a flexible schedule.
And you're a nice guy.
Yeah. Somewhat, yeah. Fairly nice. Exactly. And then so that was one element. And this separate element was like the self-respect thing where I'm just like, I'm like, realizing, I need to have more discipline and self-respect to keep. Well, self-respect, again, not the best term, but it's the best one I can come up with on the spot. But I need discipline, self-discipline to be like, no, I need to prioritize work. So early days were just more of like kind of a working vacation, I would put it. I also had less work coming in. But as time's gone on and more work has come in, that's also meant I've had to have more discipline. Right. So it kind of forces it along with the like self-reflectiveness of what had happened in those early days of self-employment. So yeah, but I'm still growing, it's, I would say in the big picture, it's still early days. So, I'm still adjusting to how I have that working relationship with myself. Well,
it's cool for me to hear your perspective on it too. And it sounds like we're kind of on a similar path.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you're a solopreneur, it is a little bit different than someone who has those external, the external factors, like if you have employees or you have a business partner, then you've got a little bit of external accountability, right? But for folks like us who are solopreneurs, there is external accountability. It's our clients.
Yes.
But when your only real deadline or your real commitment is a specific deadline, you'll have meetings and stuff along the way, but like there's a lot of like freedom to like figure out how you get to that deadline, right?
Totally.
And I think that's a real struggle for myself.
And it might be like I have to watch that with myself very carefully because it's the unforeseen, or I really didn't think something's going to take as long as it did, or something like that. But I don't think this is a particular working for yourself. There's people I've met who have a lot more problems with procrastination.
Sure.
I think that wouldn't go well in working for myself.
Yeah.
Just important I find it useful to help structure my day and figure out what my expectations are and kind of lay it all out.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe other people make it work just fine.
I think you just have to like know yourself, right? You have to know what works for you and do that. You can't. I don't think it's the best practice to like talk to someone like, hey, Jeremy, what do you do? How do you work your work week? And how does this other person and then be like, oh, well, I'm supposed to do exactly what Jeremy does. Because you can't do that. You need to like figure out what works for you.
Totally.
But it is interesting to hear how other people structure it and how it works for them.
Yeah.
Speaking of the like structuring of your day-to-day, do you factor in like vacations? Is that something you're able to do at this point in your career?
Oh, vacations are so tricky. I end up just taking them, and that's good. But it's often a struggle my wife and I trying to figure out when to take time off. And she's a teacher. And so in the summers, that's always easiest for her, but it's not always easiest for me.
I'd imagine that's busy time for you. Am I wrong?
It is. It really is. And I actually have a winter lull probably between January and February.
Mm-hmm.
I blame the December holidays. For some reason, that derails things.
I think it's common across a lot of industries. There's just like Thanksgiving, you got Christmas, you got New Year's, and things are just slow, and it's cold. Yeah.
Cold.
So, yeah. You've been able to line that up with your wife sometimes? And
we do.
So your family,
we always work it out. Yeah.
And you're not just on the laptop the entire time.
No. I'm good at walking away.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
The clients that you have, is there a lot of repeat business there? Are you building relationships that
Definitely
keep getting revisited?
Mm-hmm. I might take on a client and do something like making graphs of data for them first.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. Making graphs is good, part of the communication. It's not really the thing I love, but I've had that lead to larger and more interesting contracts. So I think there's building relationships with clients professionally, them getting to know what it is I can do and offer.
One thing I'm always curious about, and only go into what you're comfortable going into, as far as the financials, how do you handle that? Is it like you have an hourly rate, or do you just kind of get a sense of what the project is and you're able to just say like, this is what I'm going to charge for this project?
I usually tie it all back 2 hours. In some consulting books, there are statements like you never want to use an hourly rate because from the client's perspective, they might imagine you're trying to bill for the maximum number of hours. And from your own perspective, you might feel like, I don't know, you could have made more if you didn't do hourly.
Yeah.
And I've found hourly rate to work just fine. And so have to choose a rate of how much I charge. Sure. And I also keep pretty good accounts of what I'm doing with my time during the workday.
Yeah.
And so I have things coded for contracts, but I also have things coded for, say, being here right now. And and I can or other work on the business. And so I can figure out how much time I'm sinking into all of it. And that can also affect what I think about my hourly rate.
You're taking data to analyze your own business.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then end of the year, I try to see what happened. So I analyze myself.
Go figure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that makes it easy. Yeah. You already have the skills. Yeah. You're probably much better at that than I am with my time. I did for a while. I was using a spreadsheet to do exactly what you're saying, probably less efficiently than whatever software you use to code your time. But yeah, and then I would do the same thing, and I would try and get a sense of what it took to do X, Y, and Z, whether it's actual billable time or internal work on my business. And yeah, I haven't been as disciplined as I need to be about that. There's plenty of days and weeks really that I just haven't logged anything for my internal use.
Well, I mean, I have taken on a number of projects where I say, you know what, here's my justification for the amount I'm charging. And I usually build that around how many hours I anticipate it's going to take. And I'll give that to a client and we'll work from that. Hey, at these deliverable points, you'll get paid this amount of money.
Yeah.
And it can be a great way to do something, especially with somebody with a very fixed budget.
Yeah.
And but I chronically undercharge because things always take longer.
Yep.
But at the same time, I don't feel like I have to justify my hours at the same time, which is really a nice thing. So these two different models of billing, I think there's real positives and negatives to both of them.
Yeah.
For you, is it better by the project?
I mean, difficult question to answer. It's like you're alluding to. I have similar stuff where it's difficult for me to figure out. Stalling here so I can think.
Yeah.
I'm perpetually figuring out what's the best model for me. And as of this moment of speaking, I don't know if I have really dialed in on a specific model that works best as far as how I charge. I've definitely done the per project and just like, you have to I have a conversation with the client, ideally in person or on the phone, and like getting a feel for what it is. And then I'm just like, all right, well, I just guesstimate how much time, skill, resources, difficulty, all of those factors go in. And then I just say a lump sum. But when I quote that, I'll break it down into like, all right, just more for their understanding. So I can say like, okay, here's the gear that's involved, and then I charge like a gear rental line. And then here's like the pre-production, the production, the post-production like costs, and then here's the so line items, right?
Yeah.
But there isn't like an hourly rate anywhere in there. It's just like the
sense.
Production cost is whatever, $800. So then they can kind of see a little bit of what it takes. But then, like you just said for yourself, like I've had projects where I'm just like, well, I was so off. Like I just, I made very little, or that was not a great hourly rate when it came to my time.
Yep.
And there's been some projects where it's been the other way too, where I'm like, oh no, that was pretty good. But it's usually the first one. It's usually underestimating. And so that's when I started introducing the hourly. I had a long-term client for a couple of years when I still held a day job. And that was an hourly rate and that we had agreed upon. And that kind of worked. But what I was realizing over time is like it was the value as far as each party, me and them, was shifting. Whereas like, because I was doing consistent work for the same type of work for them over a few years. Yeah. And I was learning that I'm like, the better I get at my job, at the job I'm doing for them, the less time it takes me. So the less I bill them. And then for them, they're getting it to them quicker and better because I'm now more skilled at it. But I didn't really up my rates, which is mistake A. But mistake B, I was learning that like the hourly rate isn't really like, I didn't really think it might, there probably was a better way to do that, but I hadn't figured it out in the moment. But anyways, that was a learning experience. And like,
that's really interesting.
I don't have that client anymore, but I did do that. And that was a learning point that's been in the back of my mind. Well, in more recent times, I'm going back to like integrating hourly rates into like the quote and the way I charge, not for every project, but for a lot of them when I can like, especially ones that I'm like, there's a lot of ambiguity in there. And sometimes I do work where it's just like freelance work where I'm not actually producing, say it's a video and it's not me producing every element of it. Like if it's a promotional video for business, I'm not there like thinking of the idea, planning the execution, shooting it, and then editing it. All I'm doing is I'm getting hired as a cinematographer to just come in for another client. Like I've been doing a lot of work at OSU here in town, and I just get hired, and it's like, well, here's my hourly rate, and here's the gear rental, and they just hire me. They've done everything. I'm just a hired gun, essentially, just to shoot. Right. And they get the video and they edit, and they've done all the pre-production, set up all the interviews. Those obviously lend themselves to an hourly rate because it's like, here's my time.
Totally.
But it's those other projects where it's like they're coming to me for everything that it becomes a little bit more difficult. And then I have to decide whether I do the hourly rate or a lump project sum. So the work structure is a work in progress.
Right.
And it probably will be for a while, I would imagine, until I get like years and years and years under my belt and figure out how to dial it in precisely.
Yeah. I think we're all on that track, though, of learning how to do this dance.
Right. Exactly. I think one of the most important things is just that skill of like being able to communicate with the client or potential client even, and just like communicate, like you said earlier, the value of what you bring and justifying your value. I think being able to demonstrate that through your body work, through what have you, testimonials or relationships that you've had with prior clients, and also make your potential client understand what actually goes into the work that you do.
Yes.
Because I think, just like anything, if you're not an expert in the thing you're hiring the person to do, which is going to be the case 99 point whatever percent of the time, because that's why you're hiring them, then most people will have a simplified view of what someone else does. And they're just like, oh, well, you just have a camera. You just show up and point it. Why would we pay you $4,000 to create that video? That's absurd. And I'm like, well, have you tried to create the video? Try it. Like I'll give you my nice camera, but there's more to it than just the equipment. There's a whole skew of skill and time, really, specific for video. And I'm sure the same is for you or for anyone, whether they're general contractor who's building a house. It's just like, I think I understand what it would take to do that, but I'm sure if I got on the ground and they showed me their day to day,
Yeah, blow my mind.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, being able to communicate clearly is definitely a skill. Thing I didn't think about as much when I started. And
Right.
the longer I'm in business, the more I realize those like soft skills and like business skills are equally, if not more important than the actual like technical skills I have in the precise profession I'm doing.
Totally.
Since you've been in business self-employed for 7 years, are you still at that point where you're still like going back and taking classes and getting mentorship, or are you at the point where you're just kind of learning from your day-to-day as far as like growth on the business side of things?
I would say I'm more into classes and some of the growth things now.
More, okay.
And I'm just, I'm realizing that my work bumps up against a number of different areas that would be useful for me to know. And we can't know everything, but I took through the American Statistical Association, which is for people in my line of work, it's a great thing to belong to. And I remember this one pre-meeting class I took, and it revolutionized my work because it was introducing some concepts from computer science and had everything to do with project workflow. Like when you're writing code, do this, put all your constants up at the top so you can change them easily or things like that. And create an analysis pipeline where coming out the end of it is a written report, if that's your item that you're trying to build, so that you can change anything upstream of the pipeline and it just trickles on down and means not having to go through by hand and making mistakes.
Yeah.
So you're talking about how you're working for that client and getting better and better and offering them, basically you're like discounting them as you go.
Kind of, yeah, pretty much exactly.
Yeah. I think my workflow has changed a lot. I think I'm a much better programmer than I was when I started this. And I need to, I feel a strong urge to try to stay current. So I've been looking into ChatGPT and integrating AI into my workflow to see if that's a tool I can use.
Interesting.
So far, not really, but I think it's getting there.
Yeah.
I could say, hey, write me some code that does X, Y, and Z. And it sends back something and I can say, yeah, it just about works. I'm curious if you experience this. Working for myself, I feel it becomes a very inward looking experience because I want to ask myself, okay, if I want more clients or different clients, or if I want to change what I'm working on, how can I go about and do that? And asking myself, what is my workflow? How am I spending my time during the day, over the week, over the month? And is it leading towards that? So, which then leads to what are my personality traits and so on. So I feel like I've learned a lot about myself. And along those lines, I think I'm also realizing that building a larger community of other entrepreneurs who I can talk to, work with, bounce ideas off of, commiserate, whatever, I think could be enormously useful. That could help me, I think, level up in numerous ways,
Yeah.
see opportunities I never thought about before.
Sure. I definitely have like similar things running through my head and experiences as far as that, especially now, because I was doing this like as a business, but very like, side hustle, if you want, I hate that term, but yeah, that's what it was for.
I hate it too.
Yeah, that's what it was, for lack of a better term, for years. And I didn't really see the clear difference between it being the quote unquote side hustle versus it being what I did full time. I think in my mind back then, when it was just a side hustle, I was just like, the difference is that I don't have a day job and I'm just doing it full time, but nothing else has changed outside of I've increased the hours that I am doing the photography because now I don't have a day job to chew up my time.
Right.
But I didn't think about a lot of the things you just mentioned as far as like direction, camaraderie. Camaraderie was a big one actually. And all the other challenges. I just like thought of it in a very like robotic, like on paper way of just like, here's the difference between my life now with a day job and a side hustle versus what my life will be if it's just the side hustle. Well, it wouldn't be a side hustle then, but just as a business. Yeah. And I didn't think about it like in a deep way until I was forced to when I arrived, and I'm like, quit the day job.
Right.
So I found that one of the biggest ones for me was just like that sense of camaraderie and like meeting other entrepreneurs and self-employed people. It's honestly, it's what the seeds were for this podcast.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was just like wanting to hear and meet other self-employed people and hear what their story was. And because, I was learning, I'm just like, now that I'm trying to do it, I'm like, how do you do it? How do people do this? Like, it's difficult. So I wanted to hear other people's stories and meet them. And I was like, I could just record that and turn it into a podcast. And then that would both promote me and them while I'm also learning and just, meeting them. So that's what I chose to do. And
that's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, it's not an original idea. It is an idea that required a ton of work. Yeah. So it wasn't as simple as just like, oh yeah, I'll just do that. Like set up a couple of cameras. Okay. Yeah. You're throwing some good questions at me too.
All right. Good. Do
you find that you have to do a lot of marketing and networking now, or is it pretty self-sustaining as far as your client flow?
Fairly self-sustaining. I think it's important to maintain reaching out to clients, current and previous, and it's very, very informal.
Yeah.
But letting people know, hey, I'm a little light right now.
Sure.
Or if somebody contacts me and it's like, I can't take anything at the moment, but it sounds really interesting. What's your timeline?
Yeah.
So I've really only used an informal route, and so far so good.
Do you collaborate with other people in your field, like specifically your field of statistics and analysis? Is there ever any like overlap of just like, can we tackle this project together, and you reach out with other people?
That's something I would love to do, but I haven't done so far.
Okay.
Being part of a team, whether it's a team of fellow consultants or joining an existing team, I would look forward to that, but it hasn't happened so far.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are there people like that you at least know of, whether locally? I guess you don't really have to connect locally because you can, it's a remote world at this point. But are there other people you've at least met on a casual level?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is there ever any like exchange there as far as referrals, or maybe just like general like problem solving, or just like relatability where you're just like, oh, I've had to deal with this, like,
I think I've had all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've given referrals and received referrals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how have you experienced that? For me, when I was like, a while ago, I viewed it more as like, those are competitors as far as if they're, photographers. But now I don't as much.
Yeah.
What was your process like?
I initially worried they'd be competitors.
Yeah.
But I find that a lot of us do slightly different work, or in different ponds. Like maybe somebody's working in an NGO related area, whereas I'm more governmental. And so I haven't really felt much in the way of competition.
Yeah.
And in fact, I feel more secure when I meet people who are doing some stuff similar to my own.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because
what's that?
A number of some soft things, not telling clients no so much as, hey, this other person's got this great skill set. It might be even more appropriate for you than what I've got. I've done that. And let's see. Oh, I'm losing the thought.
That's all right. Shifting gears, what about the future? What do you see for yourself?
It's funny. I've talked to people who've worked for themselves and then gone back to working for others. It's a struggle. It's a real struggle.
In their experience?
Just losing that, your own control over your own time.
Yeah.
I love what I do, but I could see it changing.
Yeah.
I collaborate with my clients, but collaborating with other consultants, that could be very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm interested in having some shifts in my focus. So perhaps less on forestry and more on carbon accounting or carbon sequestration. That's a big rising field. I'd love to be part of it.
Yeah.
Had some contracts involved in that. And I'm also excited about, and this is my wife's encouragement, but also taking some of my time and making it volunteer. are there projects out there that I really want to see happen that I could perhaps help out with?
Yeah.
It all comes back to doing, how can I do more of what I love or is rewarding to me or I find worthwhile?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just made me think of something that I forgot to ask you earlier.
Yeah.
When you started, did you do much of that where you're volunteering in order to build like a working portfolio of examples?
A bit. I worked for I did a project for my wife's school and they gave me a little bit of money. I spent a lot of hours on it. And it was a really good experience in running through all the steps of working with the client. And my hourly rate on that one was very, very low.
I've done a couple of those exact things where just like they're portfolio building, skill sharpening. There might be some money, but it's basically nothing compared to what you actually spend. But those projects are valuable.
Yeah.
In the future, you do hope to have free time to be able to work on some like projects you believe in.
I think giving myself free time and really valuing that. So instead of just getting a monetary reward, also get that reward of focusing more on that output, what that output is.
Mm-hmm. You never know what the future will hold, so I'm sure.
Yeah. Also, I think that's a great way to potentially, who knows, by taking off in these different directions, there could be contracts out there. Diversify who I know, my network. That's everything.
I'm always surprised, and this goes beyond just the business realm of my life, but just in life in general. It's just like when you I look back at whatever, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I put my current day self in the shoes of me back then. And I'm like, could I ever predicted that I would be in this position in life, whatever that is, 3, 5, 10 years down? And I'm just like, no. And like, it's kind of incredible when you look back and you just like, you can factor for some things in life and you can predict and plan and target some things in life, but a lot of it you can't. And it's just reacting, going with the flow of what happens and making decisions along the way. So
yeah,
I try and always remind myself of that and not try and stress about the future too much.
Along those lines, I have a belief that the more I put myself out there, the more that these life-changing things can occur, positive life-changing things can occur.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also like thinking back on, what are the handful of events in my life that seemed totally happenstance at the time, but absolutely changed everything for how things went.
Yeah, the little butterfly effect type thing of just flap to the butterfly's wings can change.
Exactly.
Huge events.
Single conversations, just whatever.
Sure. Life's fun that way.
You asked about, the plans for the future, and one like thought process I often find myself running through is, well, what do I want to have happen with this business? Because one thing people can do is grow it and start hiring employees and change their own role in it. I always come back to not wanting to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is that because you enjoy so much working with the numbers and doing like being hands-on?
Exactly. Yeah. It fully comes around to maintaining myself doing what I like.
Right.
And yet I feel like there's some, I don't know if it's societal pressures or just weirdness on my part, but I feel like there's pressure to actually, success is growing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that's 100% a societal issue. Like it's like the American way, right? Is growth. Right. Growth is success. And that's like, we're taught that they're synonymous. But I think what you're questioning is the same thing I question is like, well, really, success should be self-defined, right?
Right.
And not externally defined.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The last interview I did was with, how I got introduced to you was with April at Wild Goose Bakery. During my conversation with her on the podcast, she was telling me about how she got, went from baking and now she does very little hands-on baking.
Oh, interesting.
And it's because she's got employees, a lot of employees who work under her, and now she's doing a lot of the buying and the managing and everything else that is involved in the bakery itself.
Yeah.
So that's what happens to a lot of people. Everyone's case is going to be different. I'm speaking of hers as an example. I think for some people, they can find it just happens and there's not a lot of thought, and it's just like, oh, and now I'm here. And then they might have that realization. I was like, I don't like it here.
Yes.
But I think a lot of people probably do have intention with it. Like, oh, how do I scale? In order to scale, I need to hire and delegate.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said if you can self-identify before you even get to that decision point, which is what you're referring to about that decision point
Definitely.
in the future. And you can make a decision now of like, why am I doing this? What's success for me?
Mm-hmm.
And then plan accordingly. And when you get to those decision points, you have already done the thought and it makes those decisions intentional in the correct direction. So yeah, I respect that. You might want to stay small. There's nothing wrong with it.
Oh, plus, can you imagine laying people off when the economy turns or anything like that?
I can imagine it. Sounds
really rough.
Yeah. I mean, to me, honestly, it sounds horrible to have like just difficult conversations, which are absolutely going to be a necessity if you have any employees. But yeah, laying people off is just the ultimate, right?
Totally.
Well, Jeremy, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you do? Or
I've got a website, groomanalytics.com, and Jeremy at groomanalytics.com was a great way to email me.
Gotcha. Perfect. Yeah. We'll share all that in the show notes.
Cool.
Jeremy, this has been a fantastic conversation.
That's been very fun.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
You betcha.
All right. And there you have it. It's a fantastic conversation with Jeremy. And if you want to hear more conversations like this, please subscribe and follow the podcast. Until then, this has been the Bossless Path. Catch you next time.